Zohran Mamdani, the socialist mayoral candidate for New York, has achieved a stunning upset to become the Democratic Party's nominee. Mamdani won the popular vote in the first round with 43% to Cuomo's 36%, winning the primary in the second round, with second preferences taking Mamdani over the 50% threshold. Coming second place was Andrew Cuomo, seen as the establishment's candidate. Cuomo outspent Mamdani significantly. He raised $36 million, where most of that came from corporate super PACs, compared to Mamdani's $9 million, with the majority from public funding. What makes this a huge deal is not only the fact that he went up against the corporate machine, but when he announced his candidacy, he was polling at 1%. His policy platform of free buses, free childcare, rent freezes, city-owned grocery stores, building affordable housing, and raising taxes on New Yorkers who earn $1 million or more, coupled with his staunch support for Palestine, propelled him to victory. That and an incredible ground game with charisma comparable to Obama. Mamdani electrified the race and gave people a sense of hope and enthusiasm. And he also faced multiple smears, with many calling him an anti-Semite for his position on Israel. This clearly didn't work, as the race wasn't even close. Now, just before we went live this evening, our very own Curtis Daly caught up with US commentator and journalist Matt Binder to discuss the campaign.
So this was a stunning upset. I just want to get your reaction to this phenomenal result.
In one word, insane. Like, it is insanity that this happened in this way. Like, the momentum was moving in Zohran Mamdani's favor. Like, this wasn't an impossibility. And it was becoming more and more of a possibility as the election day got closer and closer. But even in the best polls, which there weren't many for Mamdani in like the professional polling, apparatus, those polls were always in Cuomo's favor for the most part until we got really close to the election. I believe the first poll that showed Mamdani ahead was literally a poll that came out shortly before the election, like days. And that poll basically said that Cuomo would be in the lead up until the final round of voting. Now, this is a ranked choice voting primary, and I can explain that in a second. And so Cuomo would be in the lead until the final round of voting, and then Mamdani would finally take the lead by just a point or two. Now, NYC in the primaries here for the mayoral election, we have something called ranked choice voting. And basically, voters can go in and they can vote for their top 5 favorite candidates. They pick who they want in their number 1 choice, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. And what happens is that at the end of the election, each candidate's votes are tallied, and the candidates with the least votes get eliminated each round. And then when they get eliminated, the people who voted for them in that round, their votes then get redistributed to whoever that voter's second place choice was. And then, down the line it goes. The next person gets eliminated. Anyone who voted for them, they get their third choice, then their vote goes to. So the belief was that Mamdani could pull this off, but it wouldn't be until all the other candidates were finally eliminated and all of their voters had their votes redistributed. And then, and only then, would Mamdani finally just squeak by. And if that was the case, we still wouldn't know this would happen because the New York City Board of Elections isn't going to have that final round of votes tabulated until next Tuesday, July 1st.
And what was interesting is that Cuomo really outspent Mamdani. Of course, most of Cuomo's donations came from corporate PACs. But as an outsider, right, seeing Elon Musk pretty much buying the presidential election, this race shows that there is still democracy left and people can, fight the corporate machine.
Right. I think it really comes down to 2 main things. People talk about all these different factors, the social media aspect, charisma, the candidate, all these things matter. But I think when it came for this race, it came down to 2 specific things. What Mamdani stood for, like what his policies were, what his vision was, what he focused on. And then number 2, the way he campaigned. There is something about meeting voters where they are in person in their community that simply cannot be replaced. And every time a underdog upstart candidate has pulled off that upset, that campaign strategy has at its core been taking that important message and bringing it to exactly where voters are face to face, so they get to meet you and trust you, because that's just something people like even in this age of the internet, people will trust someone who meets them face to face and talks to them like a human being, and that they can see is a human being. They really tried to railroad Mamdani as this sort of anti-Semitic person because he simply stood up for Palestinian people and criticized the Israeli government. And that just wasn't working with people who met him. And so many people met him because meeting Mamdani was a core campaign strategy.
Yeah, I do want to touch upon that. During the primary, we saw what I call the Corbyn treatment. So former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn was called an anti-Semite, and we saw the same for Zohran, but some of the most disgusting attacks I've seen. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. So it was something that has worked elsewhere for APAC, for example, which is a huge pro-Israel lobbying organization here in the States. They are behind many progressive losses in more conservative areas of the country, or they even saying that might be completely not accurate, but they do put a lot of money where they think a progressive is vulnerable to lose, so that if they are not responsible for it, they can take responsibility for the loss. But they do back a lot of conservative candidates on both the Democratic side of the aisle and the Republican side of the aisle. And, they didn't get involved here because I guess the mayoral race wasn't something that they were concerned about. But the tactics that they use to paint the candidates they're working against as anti Semites were in full swing. And literally at every turn over these past couple of weeks where it looked like Zohran Mamdani could possibly pull it off, the media went into overdrive in trying to deploy those tactics against Mamdani. He was labeled anti-Semitic. You had pro Zionist conservative influencers and talking heads, even sort of moderate talking heads out there, talking about how New York City is the biggest population of Jewish people outside of Tel Aviv, and what does this say for the people of the Jewish people in New York, and how are they in danger if under a Mamdani regime? And it was, you got it from the media. Every question was asked to him was about his stances on Israel. This is a guy running for mayor of New York City. He has the 5 boroughs to take care of: Bronx, Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island. And that's that. Foreign policy does not have any place in this discussion, yet he was constantly badgered here. And he handled it superbly. I think for me, a real standout moment was at the debate, one of the first of the 2 debates that he had, where he was standing up there with a number of the other candidates, Cuomo included, and they're being asked, as mayor of New York City, what would your first foreign trip be? And candidate after candidate we're saying, oh, I'd visit the Holy Land, I'd visit Israel, I'd visit our number one ally, Israel. And they would also talk about how many times they've been to Israel prior and what number of visit this would be. And Zohran, literally every candidate said Israel. And Zohran Mamdani was the only candidate who didn't only not say Israel, but his response perfectly pointed out how ludicrous the question was, regardless of if you said Israel or not. He simply said, I would just stay in New York and meet with New Yorkers in the 5 boroughs. And I would meet with Jewish New Yorkers in the 5 boroughs to see what they would need from me as mayor. And that was a perfect answer, because it took the how ludicrous this question was for a local government position, And it turned it on its head and refocused it back on what he actually can do and what he should focus on as mayor. And it just was the perfect encapsulation of how this guy was a different candidate on just so many levels. He never wavered from his position. He never threw his pro-Palestinian and Zionism criticism under the bus. He stood firm while still at the same time ensuring Jewish New Yorkers that they had nothing to worry about. And the whole ridiculousness too is underscored by the fact of he had Jewish people working on his campaign. Young Jewish people make up a huge swath of his supporters. And in fact, now that we know what happened on election day, now that we can Monday morning quarterback this, it is simply impossible for Zohran Mamdani to have pulled off the win in the way that he did without winning over a substantial portion of Jewish people in New York City. And this is before we even get to those final rounds where there was this fantastic thing that happened with ranked choice voting where candidates can form coalitions with other candidates without a candidate having to drop out and admit it's over for them. Because you can simply say, vote for me as number one and this guy is number two. We're in lock and step. We agree on so many things. And when one gets eliminated, those supporters go to the other guy. And Brad Lander, who is currently the New York City comptroller, he's also a Jewish New Yorker. He's a bit more liberal. He's progressive, but not like a democratic socialist, at least like a SocDem and a social democrat. And he and Mamdani formed this alliance. And not only did they form this alliance where they told their voters to rank the other guy as number two in order to stop Andrew Cuomo, they also campaigned together. And whenever Zohran Mamdani was being knocked as this sort of anti-Semite for his views on Israel, Lander was there to defend Mamdani. And it's unfortunate this needed to be, that a Muslim New Yorker would need this, but at the same time, this is a campaign and you need to pull out all the stops. As a Jewish New Yorker, Lander was there to speak in defense of Mamdani. And I think it was super important. And at the end of the day, whatever Cuomo gets as those other candidates are knocked out and their votes are distributed, and of course, some of those votes will go to Cuomo, Lander came in as a safe third place, distant from Cuomo and Zohran, who were far and away first and second, but also third place far and away from everyone else who did much worse than Lander in third place. And at the end of the day, whatever votes Cuomo will gain, the Lander votes that go to Zohran when Lander is eventually knocked out in the second to last round of voting, it's going to basically just make all those votes that Cuomo gains from the other eliminations moot. Because it's gonna just make them like they didn't even happen, because the number of Lander number one votes that are going to go number two to Zohran. So it was a display of what can be possible when the left and progressives decide to come together to stop conservatives and candidates that don't represent their values. Lander and Mamdani don't agree on everything, but they agreed on like 99% of the issues, and they decided to form this alliance. And I think there's something to learn there for future candidates as well.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.